The woman who called the cops on me for illegally occupying my own damn property just lost her house, her fake power, and banned her entire HOA from the lake they've been gatekeeping for 30 years. And it gets so much better. I'm Garrett, 52, marine mechanic from Pine Ridge, Michigan. Picture this. I inherit Uncle Morris's lakefront cabin, pull up on moving day with my pickup loaded down. You can smell the pine needles mixing with lake water, hear gravel crunching under my tires. Should be peaceful, right? Wrong. This HOA president Delilah rolls up in her white BMW like she owns the place, starts barking orders about permits and community standards. When I keep unloading my boxes onto my property, she whips out her phone, films me like I'm some criminal, then calls 911 reporting a suspicious individual. What would you have done when some random woman tries to police your own moving day? And where are you watching this from? Drop your location below. Trust me, this revenge story has more twists than a mountain highway. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. My Uncle Morris was one of those Vietnam vets who kept to himself but had more backbone than a steel beam factory. He owned this beautiful 2-acre lakefront property in Pine Ridge, 200 feet of natural shoreline, 1960s cabin that needed some TLC but had good bones. When cancer took him last spring, he left it all to me. Morris never talked much about problems with the neighbors, just mentioned something about busybody types who think they run the world. I figured he meant the usual small-town politics. Boy, was I wrong. The deed was crystal clear. Property extended right to the water's edge, dated 1962, 15 years before this Pine Ridge HOA even existed. Morris had paid cash for prime lakefront when most folks were still figuring out what a mortgage was. So there I am on a perfect June Saturday, truck loaded with my tools, basic furniture, couple boxes of personal stuff. The smell of pine needles hits you first, then that clean lake water scent that makes you want to drop everything and go fishing. I can hear families laughing somewhere across the water, kids splashing around. This is exactly what Morris would have wanted, the place being lived in again. Appreciated. I'm barely out of the truck when this white BMW X5 comes crunching up my gravel driveway. Out steps this woman, blonde hair that looks like it costs more than my monthly rent, holding a clipboard like it's some kind of weapon. She's got that particular brand of suburban authority written all over her face. "Excuse me," she says, not bothering with hello or introducing herself. "Do you have permits for this activity?" I'm thinking, activity? Lady, I'm moving boxes. "You mean moving into my own house?" "Well," she sniffs, looking down her nose at my work boots. "We'll see about that. This is a restricted community." That's when she tells me her name's Delilah Kramer, HOA president for 8 years running. 8 years of practice being everyone's boss, apparently. I explain about inheriting from Morris, show her my driver's license, even pull out the deed. She barely glances at it before launching into this speech about community standards and proper procedures. Meanwhile, I'm just trying to unload a toolbox and a recliner. "Your truck is blocking emergency access," she announces, pointing at my perfectly legal parking in my own driveway. "Emergency access to what? The lake? Move it, immediately." When I keep unloading instead of jumping at her command, she gets that look, you know the one, like someone just told her McDonald's ran out of ketchup packets. Out comes her phone, starts filming me like I'm robbing a bank. "Sir, you are refusing to comply with community regulations," she says to the camera, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Then she dials 911. I kid you not, this woman called the police because I wouldn't move my truck from my own driveway. "I need to report a suspicious individual who's refusing to follow community guidelines," she tells the dispatcher. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars roll up. The officers are professional, polite, they check my ID, verify it matches the deed, ask if there's been any actual crime committed. When they realize it's just an HOA dispute, you can see the, "Oh, one of these calls" look cross their faces. Delilah's still insisting there must be unpaid assessments or covenant violations. One officer mentions this is the 3rd call about Morris's property this year. That's when Delilah mutters something under her breath about certain types of people thinking they can just disrupt established communities. The dust kicked up by the patrol cars tastes metallic, mixed with the overwhelming cloud of perfume Delilah's wearing. My toolbox makes this satisfying clang when it hits the gravel, the sound of a man who's not backing down from bullies. After the cops leave, Delilah gives me this icy smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she says. "I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other." She had no idea how right she was. 2 days later, I'm sitting on Morris's old porch with my morning coffee. That first sip always tastes like freedom when you're surrounded by pine trees, when the mail carrier hands me this thick certified letter. Return address, Pine Ridge HOA Legal Department. Already sounds expensive. Inside is a bill that nearly made me spit coffee all over the deck. $15,000. Not a typo, 15 grand in accumulated violations and fees for a property I'd owned for exactly 72 hours. Let me break down this masterpiece of creative accounting for you. $200 a month in community maintenance fees dating back 5 years, that's 12 grand right there. Then there's a $500 architectural review violation because Morris never got approval for fixing his deck in 1987. Apparently, replacing 3 rotted boards without a committee meeting is a federal case. But here's the kicker: $2,500 in shoreline usage penalties for unauthorized lake access on lakefront property. That I legally own, with deeded water rights. The remaining $8,000? Legal and administrative costs. For what legal work exactly? Typing up this fantasy invoice? Now, I'm a hands-on guy, but I also learned something important during my divorce 10 years back. When someone tries to scam you with legal-sounding paperwork, you fight back with better paperwork. So instead of just getting mad, I drove straight to the county clerk's office. Place smells like old paper and industrial disinfectant, but they've got every property record going back to when Michigan was mostly trees and good intentions. Turns out Morris's original deed from 1962 explicitly grants perpetual lake access and usage rights. The language is so clear a kindergartner could understand it. The HOA didn't even incorporate until 1977, 15 years later. My dad always told me that you can't change the rules after the game's already started, and apparently that applies to property law too. While I'm researching, Delilah's busy playing politics. She sends flyers to all 47 HOA households calling an emergency community meeting about recent security concerns and declining property values. Real subtle, right? The flyers got clip art of a house with a big red X over it. Looks like something my nephew could have made in middle school computer class. Here's where she made her first big mistake. The meeting's held in their community clubhouse, one of those generic buildings that smells like burnt coffee and 20-year-old carpet. I show up uninvited because, hey, they're talking about me. 23 people in folding chairs, mostly older couples who look like they'd rather be watching Wheel of Fortune. Delilah's got a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not kidding. She took photos of my property without permission, aerial shots, close-ups of Morris's shed, even pictures of my truck. Claims property taxes will plummet if non-conforming structures aren't addressed immediately. But here's my counterpunch. When she's done with her little show, I stand up with my folder of county records. Hi, I'm Garrett, the guy you've been talking about. I inherited this property from my uncle, who served his country in Vietnam. I'm a marine mechanic. I plan to restore the cabin respectfully, and here's my deed showing I have every legal right to lake access, signed 15 years before this HOA even existed. You could hear a pin drop. Half the room's looking embarrassed, like they just realized they've been gossiping about someone's funeral. After the meeting, 3 people approach me quietly. Frank and Marlene, this sweet elderly couple, plus Chelsea, a single mom who works at the county planning office. Turns out Delilah's been targeting several properties with similar shakedown tactics. She tried to fine us for our garden shed, Frank whispers, the fluorescent lights making his worried face look even older. It's been there since 1991. Chelsea leans in closer, glancing around nervously. She's not just power hungry. There's something else going on with the finances. Next morning, and this is where Delilah really showed her cards, I wake up to find orange violation notices stapled to my property like some kind of Halloween decoration. Unapproved vehicle parking for my truck in my driveway. Lawn maintenance deficiency for the grass Morris let grow naturally to prevent erosion. Exterior color noncompliance for the cabin's original cedar stain that's older than disco. Each notice has a fine schedule attached, $50 a day until corrected. They're literally trying to fine me for existing on my own property. I started keeping a detailed log of every interaction time, date, witnesses, what was said. The metallic scratch of my pen on paper became the soundtrack to my evenings. My toolbox might make noise when it hits the gravel, but paperwork can be deadly quiet and twice as dangerous. That evening, sitting on Morris's dock watching the sunset paint the lake orange and gold, I realized Delilah had just made a critical error. By coming at me this aggressively, this fast, she'd revealed she was desperate to get rid of me before I discovered something. The question was, what was she so afraid I'd find? Week 2 of living in paradise, and Delilah decided to turn up the crazy dial to 11. She started driving by my property twice a day, morning and evening like some kind of suburban patrol. I'd be out fixing Morris's old dock, hear that BMW purring down the gravel road, and there she'd be, slowing down to take pictures with her phone. The woman had less subtlety than a brass band in a library. Then came the noise complaints. I'm talking about filing official complaints with the county about me using power tools during completely legal hours, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays. She claimed my circular saw was disturbing the peace at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Lady, this is rural Michigan, not downtown Manhattan. But her masterpiece? Calling the fire department about illegal burning when I had a small campfire in the designated fire pit Morris installed back in 1995 with proper permits that I found in his old filing cabinet. The fire chief showed up, took one look at the legal setup, then spent 20 minutes apologizing for wasting everyone's time. The harassment was systematic, almost professional. Every morning brought fresh drama-certified letters, violation notices, phone calls to various county departments reporting imaginary infractions. It was like she had a calendar reminder set. Tuesday, invent new way to torment Garrett. That's when Frank shuffled over one evening while I was grilling dinner. Poor guy looked like he'd been carrying a secret for years. She didn't just take over the HOA, he said, glancing around like we were planning a bank heist. She ran unopposed for 4 straight terms. Nobody else wanted the headache. But here's what's really interesting, he continued, accepting my offer of a beer. Her husband owns Pine Ridge Property Management, the company that handles all our HOA maintenance contracts. Convenient, right? Now, I've seen enough shady mechanics overcharge customers to recognize a scam when I hear one. Back in my Navy days, we had a saying about people who made money off both sides of a problem. They usually created the problem in the first place. Meanwhile, Chelsea started dropping hints during our casual conversations. Working at the county planning office, she'd seen patterns in how certain violations got reported and resolved. It's funny, she said one afternoon, how properties that fight back seem to have more code issues than ones that just pay up. I started keeping that detailed log I mentioned, every interaction, every letter, every phone call, with dates and witnesses. My dining table looked like a detective's evidence board. When you're dealing with someone who operates in shadows, you drag everything into the light. That's when the sabotage started. My water got mysteriously shut off on a Friday afternoon. City claimed unpaid bill, but Morris's records showed he was current through the end of summer. Took 3 days and $200 in reconnection fees to get it restored conveniently, just after I'd missed a weekend of work on the cabin. Frank later revealed that Delilah had recruited a network of neighborhood spies, 4 or 5 residents who'd report any suspicious activity at my property. They were logging my visitors, work hours, even what I threw in the garbage. It was like living in some twisted Homeowners Association version of East Germany. But here's where I started playing chess while she was playing checkers. I installed security cameras, completely legal, positioned only on my own property. Within 48 hours, those cameras captured gold. Footage of Delilah entering my property without permission to photograph my electrical panel. The crisp autumn air carried the sound of her BMW engine idling during her surveillance drives. I could smell the exhaust mixing with the scent of dying leaves. My coffee mug felt warm in my hands as I watched her through the kitchen window, documenting her documenting me. When I confronted her about trespassing, she had the audacity to claim community safety obligations. Safety obligations? I said, keeping my voice calm. Lady, the only unsafe thing around here is your driving skills during your stalking sessions. She threatened to call police again. I smiled and handed her a business card for my lawyer. Well, the legal clinic I'd consulted. But she didn't need to know that detail. My counterpunch was simple but effective. I filed a formal trespass notice with the sheriff's department and sent a certified letter to the HOA attorney documenting unauthorized property entry. Every piece of harassment was now creating a paper trail that could bite them back. The rough texture of legal papers became familiar under my fingers. The satisfying thunk of my 3-hole punch organizing evidence. The metallic taste of determination in my morning coffee as I planned my next moves. Delilah was escalating because she was scared. But scared people make mistakes, and I was keeping track of every single one. Month 2 of the Pine Ridge War, and Delilah decided to go nuclear. I'm talking about the kind of move that would make a dictator proud. She installed a chain-link fence blocking the traditional path to the lake. I discovered this masterpiece on a Tuesday morning when I walked down for my usual coffee and sunrise routine. There it was, 6 feet of gleaming metal mesh with no trespassing, HOA property signs every 10 feet. The smell of fresh galvanized steel mixed with morning dew, and the fence made this hollow rattling sound when the wind hit it, like the gates of bureaucratic hell. But here's the beautiful irony. The fence didn't just block my access. It also cut off Frank and Marlene's pathway they'd used for 20 years to reach their favorite fishing spot. Delilah had just declared war on the entire neighborhood to get to me. "This is HOA common property," she announced when half the community showed up to stare at her handiwork. "We have every right to control access for safety and maintenance purposes." Safety? The path was a gentle slope through some pine trees. Unless she was worried about aggressive squirrels, the only dangerous thing was her driving. Now, I'd learned something important from my grandfather, who surveyed property back when men used actual chains and compasses. He always said, when someone builds a fence, they're usually trying to hide where the real property line is. So I did what any smart property owner does. I hired a licensed surveyor for $800. The results were beautiful. The fence wasn't just on my property, it was 15 feet onto my land, completely blocking access rights that had been legally guaranteed since 1962. I've got to admit, watching that surveyor drive his stakes while Delilah paced around taking photos was better than cable TV. But Delilah doubled down like a gambler with house money. She hired her own surveyor, who happened to be her husband's business partner, what a coincidence, and claimed my survey was biased, despite identical measurements. Her guy produced this creative interpretation that somehow made 15 feet of my property into disputed common area. This is where her desperation started showing. She circulated a petition demanding the city council investigate property tax assessments in our neighborhood. Translation: she wanted them to challenge my waterfront property status, hoping higher taxes might force me to sell. While she was playing politics, I was playing detective. Chelsea helped me access historical aerial photos from the county planning office, black and white images from the 1970s that clearly showed Uncle Morris's property had an established lake access path decades before the HOA existed. But the real breakthrough came when we started digging deeper into those tax records. Turns out 6 HOA properties, including Delilah's, had been claiming waterfront tax status despite having zero actual lake access. They were getting tax breaks meant for properties with water rights breaks they weren't legally entitled to. I remember sitting in that dusty county office, the afternoon sun slanting through dirty windows when Chelsea pointed to the screen. "Look at this," she whispered. "Combined improper tax benefits total over $45,000 across these properties over the past 5 years. The metallic click of the computer mouse seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet office. This wasn't just HOA overreach, this was potential fraud. When the county assessor confirmed this was worth investigating, Delilah went into full panic mode. She organized an emergency board meeting to discuss legal action against property tax challenges. Only 3 of 7 board members showed up. The others were getting tired of her constant drama. My attorney, and yes, I'd finally hired a real one for $500 consultation, sent a demand letter requiring fence removal within 5 days or face a lawsuit for property damage and interference with deeded access rights. The legal language was beautiful, precise, polite, and absolutely terrifying. But the community pressure was building too. Frank and Marlene organized an informal gathering of fed-up residents. 12 households signed a letter demanding Delilah stop the harassment tactics and respect everyone's property rights. Even some of her previous supporters were jumping ship. Delilah's retaliation was swift and predictably petty. She filed a complaint with the county health department claiming my septic system was non-compliant, even though it had just passed inspection when I inherited the property. She also reported Uncle Morris's perfectly legal deck to the building inspector, hoping to find some violation from 1987. The sound of her BMW became the neighborhood's dinner bell for drama. Every time that engine purred down our road, curtains would twitch and phones would start ringing. She'd created her own surveillance state, and now it was watching her. Standing on my dock that evening, listening to the gentle lap of waves against the shoreline I was legally entitled to access, I realized something important. Delilah wasn't just fighting me anymore, she was fighting the entire community, the county government, and basic property law. and she was losing on all fronts. 3 months into this battle, Chelsea dropped a bombshell that changed everything. We were sitting in her county office after hours, surrounded by stacks of property records and the lingering smell of burnt coffee from the break room, when she pulled up something on her computer that made my blood run cold. "Garrett," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Pine Ridge HOA hasn't filed required annual financial reports with the state for 3 years. That's not just a paperwork problem, that's automatic violation of their nonprofit status." I leaned closer to her screen, watching her fingers navigate through state corporate databases. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means they legally don't exist as a corporation anymore. Every fee they've collected, every covenant they've tried to enforce, every legal threat they've made, it's all invalid." But the rabbit hole went deeper. Chelsea had been following the money trail during her lunch breaks, and what she found was a masterclass in small-scale corruption. Delilah had been collecting $200 monthly from all 47 households. That's over $100,000 annually, but only reporting $60,000 in income on the few financial statements that did exist. The missing money? All traced back to management fees paid to her husband's company, Pine Ridge Property Management. I'd heard of keeping it in the family, but this was ridiculous. "Here's the beautiful part," Chelsea continued, clicking through more records. "Pine Ridge Property Management exists only on paper. No office address except their home, no employees, just Delilah's husband cashing HOA checks and subcontracting actual work at 300% markup." My mechanical brain started connecting the dots. It's like when a customer brings you a car with engine problems and you discover someone's been using motor oil as transmission fluid. The whole system's contaminated from the source. The smoking gun was a 2019 board meeting transcript that Chelsea found misfiled with county records. Black and white evidence showing Delilah voted herself exclusive authority over management contracts without homeowner approval, textbook self-dealing that would make a mob accountant blush. "Chelsea, you realize what this means?" I said, feeling that familiar rush you get when all the puzzle pieces suddenly click together. Every legal threat, every violation notice, every fee demand for the past 3 years, none of it matters because they don't legally exist as an HOA. She nodded grimly. Nonprofit corporations that operate without required filings face automatic dissolution. Board members become personally liable for all debts and damages. Delilah could lose her house over this. That evening, Frank came over with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Turns out he'd been keeping copies of financial records from his time as HOA treasurer before Delilah forced him out 4 years ago for asking too many questions about expenses. "I knew something was wrong," he said, spreading documents across my kitchen table. Management fees doubled the year her husband started his company. Maintenance costs went through the roof, but the actual work got cheaper and shoddier. The pattern was clear as lake water. Every major expense flowed through Delilah's husband's phantom company. Pool cleaning, lawn maintenance, snow removal, all subcontracted at massive markups, while the couple pocketed the difference. I sat back in Morris's old recliner, listening to the evening sounds of the lake through open windows, and realized the beautiful irony of the situation. Delilah had been so focused on running me off my property that she'd exposed a fraud scheme worth nearly $100,000. She wasn't just a petty tyrant, she was a common criminal who'd been stealing from her neighbors for years. And now I had the evidence to prove it. My cabin transformed into something between a war room and a detective's office. The dining table disappeared under property records, financial documents, and legal research printouts. The smell of strong coffee and highlighted legal papers filled the air, mixed with the satisfying scent of justice, finally taking shape. Frank became my financial forensics expert, arriving every morning with his reading glasses and a calculator older than disco. Chelsea handled regulatory research and county records. Marlene took on community organizing, quietly spreading word to neighbors who'd been paying illegal fees for years. And Sarah Hendricks, a local attorney who specialized in fraud cases, agreed to work on contingency, meaning she only got paid when we won. "This is beautiful," Sarah said during our first strategy meeting, spreading Frank's financial records across the table like a poker player with a royal flush. Delilah's family has improperly collected approximately $85,000 over 4 years through inflated management contracts. With interest and penalties, we're looking at damages that could triple. Our legal strategy had more prongs than a medieval weapon. First, file complaints with the Secretary of State about missing corporate filings. Second, report the tax fraud to the county assessor's office. Third, document the harassment for a potential restraining order. Fourth, prepare a civil suit for damages and legal fees. Frank's records showed the beautiful simplicity of the scam. Before Delilah's husband started Pine Ridge Property Management, the HOA paid directly for services. Lawn care cost $60 per visit. Snow plowing ran $40 per driveway. After the management company took over, those same services got billed at $200 and $150 respectively, with the management company pocketing the difference. It's like charging someone $300 to change their oil, then paying Jiffy Lube $30 to actually do it, I explained to Sarah, who laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. While we built the financial case, Marlene was conducting her own quiet revolution. Her coffee meetings with neighbors revealed 31 of 47 households were frustrated with Delilah's tactics but afraid to speak up. Many had no idea about the financial irregularities. They just paid their assessments and assumed everything was legitimate. The documentation system we created would have made the FBI proud. Every harassment incident got logged with dates, witnesses, and supporting evidence. Digital copies stored in multiple cloud locations. Physical copies locked in Sarah's office safe. We learned from watching police procedurals chain of custody matters. Sarah explained the legal nuclear option. When nonprofits dissolve for missing filings, it's called piercing the corporate veil. Board members become personally liable for all debts and damages. Delilah could lose her house, her car, her retirement savings, everything. Our regulatory complaint strategy hit them from multiple angles. Secretary of State for corporate dissolution, County Assessor for tax fraud investigation, State Attorney General for consumer fraud, IRS for nonprofit violations and unreported income. It was like surrounding a fort and cutting off all supply lines. The smoking gun evidence kept growing. Chelsea discovered that Delilah had signed management contracts with her own husband using a corporate seal after the HOA's legal status had already expired. That's not just fraud, that's forgery with criminal intent. But the community education campaign was equally important. Frank and Marlene started hosting informal neighborhood meetings explaining residents' rights. People discovered they'd been paying illegal fees for years and could demand full refunds with interest. Here's what every homeowner needs to know, I told one gathering, channeling my inner mechanics instructor. First, check your HOA's corporate status online through your state's Secretary of State database. Second, ask specific questions about management contracts and who's profiting. Third, request detailed financial records. They legally have to provide them. Fourth, document any harassment because it can become grounds for restraining orders. Sarah suggested we document everything for potential media coverage. The local ABC affiliate had been covering HOA abuse stories statewide, and public pressure could amplify our legal strategy. The timeline required 6 weeks to file all complaints, gather remaining evidence, and coordinate regulatory responses. Our goal was simultaneous disclosure, hit them from every direction at once before they could destroy evidence or hide assets. We had contingency plans too. If Delilah discovered the investigation early, we were ready to accelerate everything. All critical documents were already submitted to authorities for protection, and Sarah had emergency injunctions prepared to freeze HOA assets. Sitting in Morris's old recliner during those late-night planning sessions, listening to the gentle sound of pages turning and the satisfying click of 3-ring binders being organized with evidence tabs, I felt something I hadn't experienced since inheriting the cabin Genuine Hope. Delilah had spent months trying to drive me away with petty harassment and fraudulent fees. Now she was about to discover that sometimes the quiet guy with the toolbox knows how to use more than just wrenches. We weren't just fighting back anymore, we were going for total victory. Month 3 brought out the worst in Delilah. You know that saying about cornered animals being the most dangerous? Well, apparently that applies to corrupt HOA presidents too. It started with my mailbox getting accidentally hit by a snowplow in July. The driver claimed he was testing winter equipment, but my security cameras caught something interesting. A pickup truck that looked suspiciously similar to Delilah's husband's contractor vehicle cruising by my property at 2 a.m. the night before. The metallic crunch of destroyed mailbox parts scattered across my driveway sounded expensive. Replacing it cost me $80 and a trip to the hardware store, but it also gave me another piece of evidence for the harassment file. Then came the bribery attempt. Frank shuffled over one evening looking more uncomfortable than a vegetarian at a barbecue competition. "She approached me privately," he whispered, glancing around like we were discussing state secrets. "Offered to forgive 3 years of my assessment fees if I stopped stirring up trouble about HOA finances." I had to laugh. "So she's trying to buy you off with your own money that she stole illegally?" "That's what I figured too," Frank said, pulling out his phone. "So I recorded the conversation." But Delilah's desperation manifested in darker ways. She started spreading rumors that I was planning to subdivide the property and build multiple rental units. She even created fake development proposal documents, complete with architectural drawings she probably found online to frighten neighbors into thinking their quiet lake community would become a party destination. The smell of fear was practically radiating from her white BMW during those increasingly frequent surveillance drives. She'd sit at the end of my driveway for 20 minutes at a time, engine idling, furiously typing on her phone, probably posting in some HOA Facebook group about property value threats and undesirable elements. The intimidation campaign expanded beyond me. Chelsea came home from work one day to find 2 professional-looking men in suits asking her boss questions about her consulting work for local residents. They claimed to be conducting a routine background check, but wouldn't identify which agency they represented. They knew details about our investigation that only someone with inside access would know, Chelsea said, her voice shaking slightly. My supervisor started asking if I was involved in anything that could compromise my position at the county. Then things got truly sinister. During a long weekend when I was visiting my sister in Grand Rapids, my motion sensors triggered at the cabin. Security footage showed someone's face obscured by a baseball cap trying to jimmy the lock on my shed where I stored copies of all the HOA documents. The attempted break-in lasted 12 minutes. You could hear the frustrated muttering when the industrial-grade padlock I'd installed held firm. The sound of gravel shifting under nervous footsteps, followed by a car door slamming and tires spinning on loose stones. Professional-looking legal documents started arriving from random attorneys across the state. Cease and desist letters, property lien warnings, demands for immediate compliance with made-up regulations. Sarah laughed when she saw them. Someone's paying lawyers to send threatening letters based on completely fabricated claims. This is getting expensive for them. The pressure campaign targeted all my allies systematically. Frank received a violation notice for his 30-year-old garden shed that had never bothered anyone before. Chelsea got an anonymous complaint filed with the county ethics office alleging misuse of public resources for helping a private citizen with research. Marlene's car got keyed in the grocery store parking lot, long, deliberate scratches that spelled out, "Mind your own business." Delilah called another emergency community meeting to discuss outside agitators disrupting community peace. Only 8 people showed up, and most spent the time openly questioning her leadership instead of listening to her prepared presentation about protecting property values from undesirable influences. The financial desperation was becoming obvious too. Local contractors started calling me, asking if I knew anything about bounced checks from Pine Ridge Property Management. Apparently, Delilah's husband owed money for work performed but never paid. The management company was running out of other people's money to steal. But her nuclear option was the most vindictive yet. She filed a complaint with the state environmental agency claiming my septic system was polluting lake water. This wasn't just harassment, it required expensive testing and could potentially restrict use of my property during a lengthy investigation. The envelope from the Department of Environmental Quality felt heavy in my hands, the official letterhead making my stomach drop. The smell of bureaucratic trouble mixed with my morning coffee as I read through requirements for soil sampling, water testing, and professional inspections that could cost thousands of dollars. That's when I realized Delilah had made her biggest mistake yet. By filing false government reports, she'd crossed the line from civil harassment into criminal territory. My security cameras, financial records, and witness statements were no longer just evidence for a lawsuit. They were evidence for a criminal prosecution. The hunter had become the hunted, and she didn't even realize it yet. The dominoes started falling faster than Delilah could stack them back up. First came the state investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia who showed up at the community clubhouse with a briefcase full of subpoenas and zero tolerance for creative accounting. I happened to be walking my property line when Delilah's BMW screeched into the clubhouse parking lot, followed by Patricia's unmarked sedan. Through my binoculars, I watched Delilah frantically shuffling through file boxes, sweat stains spreading under her arms despite the October chill. Patricia emerged 2 hours later with evidence boxes and an expression that said, "I've seen this movie before and it doesn't end well for the bad guys." Delilah stumbled out behind her, clutching obviously forged documents with dates that didn't match and signatures that looked like they were practiced in a mirror. The county assessor's office moved next. Their investigator arrived with aerial survey equipment and measuring tools that would make a NASA engineer jealous. Within 3 days, they confirmed what we already knew. Multiple HOA properties had falsely claimed waterfront status for tax breaks they weren't entitled to. But here's where Delilah's panic really showed. The local news station picked up the story about the HOA fraud investigation. Channel 7's investigative reporter, a sharp woman named Maria Santos, knocked on doors throughout the neighborhood with cameras rolling. I gave my interview on Morris's restored dock, explaining the harassment campaign and showing the fraudulent fee demands. Frank and Marlene spoke about the financial irregularities. Chelsea declined on camera but provided background information that helped Maria understand the scope of the fraud. When the news van pulled up to Delilah's house, she literally hid inside and turned off all the lights. The footage of Maria knocking on a dark house while explaining the investigation made Delilah look guilty as sin. The story aired during prime time with the headline, "HOA Fraud, Local Residents Fight Back Against Illegal Fees." Within hours, it was shared hundreds of times on social media, and my phone started ringing with calls from other neighborhoods dealing with similar problems. That's when the criminal referral happened. Patricia's investigation found evidence of deliberate fraud and document forgery, not mistakes, but calculated crimes. She forwarded everything to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for prosecution. The community revolt was swift and decisive. 28 households signed a petition demanding Delilah's immediate resignation and a complete financial audit. For the first time in 8 years, residents called for an emergency HOA election. Delilah's desperation play was breathtaking in its audacity. She attempted to dissolve the HOA entirely and transfer all assets, including the clubhouse and common areas, to her husband's property management company before the investigation concluded. Essentially, she tried to steal the entire neighborhood's shared property. Sarah filed an emergency injunction faster than you could say grand theft. The judge took one look at the evidence and granted a temporary restraining order freezing all HOA accounts and preventing any property transfers. The sound of that gavel was music to my ears. Then the feds got involved. The IRS began auditing the HOA's tax-exempt status and investigating unreported income from the management company. Tax evasion charges carry serious penalties. We're talking potential prison time, not just fines. The most satisfying moment came when the HOA's former attorney contacted Sarah offering to cooperate with the investigation. Turns out he'd been advising Delilah against filing frivolous claims for months, but she'd pressured him to send threatening letters anyway. He had detailed records of every conversation where she'd ignored legal advice. During a routine title search for my property insurance, we discovered Delilah had secretly placed an illegal lien on my cabin without court approval. She'd filed fake paperwork claiming unpaid assessments, and my bank was threatening foreclosure based on fraudulent documents. The emergency court hearing was beautiful to watch. Judge Martinez ordered immediate removal of the fraudulent lien, sanctioned Delilah for filing false legal documents, and warned her about potential contempt charges if she continued harassing property owners with bogus claims. Community support had grown to 35 households actively supporting the investigation. People were demanding refunds of illegally collected fees dating back years. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in total restitution. The whistleblower evidence sealed the deal. A former board member came forward with audio recordings of Delilah discussing strategies to get rid of undesirable property owners and maximize management fee opportunities. Her own voice, captured on digital recording, planning the harassment campaign. Regional newspapers picked up the story, and a national property rights organization offered legal support for potential civil rights violations. This wasn't just a local HOA dispute anymore, it was becoming a poster case for homeowner abuse. The panic was obvious in Delilah's increasingly erratic behavior. She and her husband tried to refinance their home and access retirement accounts for legal defense funds. Their financial advisor actually contacted authorities about suspicious large withdrawal requests. Even their own banker was getting nervous. The final straw came when Delilah filed a false police report claiming I'd threatened her during a chance encounter at the grocery store. Security footage proved she'd approached me in the produce section and initiated the confrontation while I was quietly shopping for dinner ingredients. That false police report was the bridge too far. Criminal charges were filed immediately. The county commissioner's public hearing was standing room only. I'd never seen the municipal building so packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, people stood in the back, and Channel 7's camera crew had prime positioning near the front. The air buzzed with anticipation and smelled like nervous sweat mixed with industrial carpet cleaner. Commissioner Rodriguez called for order, his gavel echoing through the packed room. We're here to review the investigation findings regarding Pine Ridge HOA dissolution and alleged property rights violations. The power dynamic reversal was beautiful to witness. Delilah sat alone at a defendant's table with her expensive attorney, some slick guy from Grand Rapids who probably charged more per hour than I make in a week. Meanwhile, I was surrounded by 30-plus supporting neighbors, state investigators, media representatives, and Sarah, who'd become something of a local celebrity for taking on HOA corruption. Commissioner Rodriguez methodically reviewed the investigation findings. His voice carried the weight of bureaucratic finality as he read each devastating detail. $127,000 in improperly collected fees over 4 years. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That's my kid's college fund." 3 consecutive years of missing corporate filings, resulting in automatic dissolution of non-profit status. Delilah's attorney scribbled furious notes, probably calculating his retainer fee. Tax fraud totaling $45,000 through false waterfront property classifications. Frank squeezed Marlene's hand. They'd been paying inflated taxes while Delilah's friends got illegal breaks. Multiple instances of forged legal documents and fraudulent property liens. The sound of phones buzzing filled the room as people texted updates to neighbors who couldn't attend. Delilah's attorney stood for his client's defense, all polished confidence and expensive suit. "Commissioner, my client was simply trying to protect property values in an established community. Any administrative errors were honest mistakes, not criminal fraud. This investigation represents a witch hunt by outside agitators seeking to undermine legitimate community governance." Outside agitators? I'd lived here for months, paid taxes, and contributed more to the community than Delilah ever had. Then came my moment at the podium. The microphone felt solid in my hands, and I looked directly at Delilah as I spoke. "Commissioner Rodriguez, I'd like to read from some recordings provided by community members." I pulled out my phone and played Delilah's own voice, crystal clear through the sound system. "We need strategies to get rid of certain types of property owners who don't fit our community standards. The management fees are our primary revenue source, so we need to maximize those opportunities while discouraging undesirable elements." The room fell dead silent. You could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. That's Mrs. Delilah Kramer's voice, recorded during a private conversation about targeting homeowners like me. This isn't about property values, it's about discrimination, fraud, and abuse of power. I sat down to scattered applause and watched Delilah's face turn 3 shades of red. The community testimony was devastating. Frank detailed financial irregularities and intimidation tactics, his voice shaking with 8 years of suppressed anger. Chelsea explained how legitimate government processes had been manipulated for personal profit. An elderly resident on a fixed income described paying illegal fees while struggling to afford prescription medications. A single mom talked about living in fear of speaking up against harassment. Patricia, the state investigator, delivered the official verdict. Pine Ridge HOA is dissolved effective immediately due to corporate violations. All fees collected for the past 3 years are legally invalid and subject to refund with interest. Commissioner Rodriguez's ruling was swift and comprehensive. The evidence shows systematic fraud and harassment. I hereby order immediate dissolution of Pine Ridge HOA with full asset recovery. Personal restitution orders will be issued against Mrs. Kramer and her husband. Both parties are banned from serving on any HOA board for 5 years. Community residents will assume control of all common areas and the clubhouse. As court officers served official papers, Maria Santos from Channel 7 approached Delilah with a microphone. "Mrs. Kramer, do you have any comment about the fraud charges?" Delilah's response was perfect for evening news. "This is all a misunderstanding. The property tax assessors made errors and the investigation was biased from the beginning. I was protecting our community from..." Her attorney literally grabbed her arm and pulled her away before she could dig the hole deeper. The reversal of fortune was immediate and dramatic. Properties freed from HOA restrictions saw immediate 15% increases in assessed value. My waterfront cabin, which I'd inherited for the cost of Morris's funeral expenses, was now appraised at $85,000 more than its purchase price. The county assessor announced that all affected residents would receive tax refunds for overpayments based on false classifications. Total refunds exceeded $60,000. Money stolen through Delilah's scheme was finally going back to its rightful owners. Outside the courthouse, impromptu celebrations broke out as residents gathered around the lakeshore, our lakeshore, finally free from illegal restrictions. Children played in water they'd been banned from accessing for years. The sound of justice being served echoed across Pine Ridge that day, and it was beautiful. 6 months later, Pine Ridge feels like the America Morris fought for in Vietnam, a place where neighbors help neighbors instead of spying on each other for imaginary violations. We operate as a genuine community association with monthly meetings held right here in my restored cabin. The smell of fresh coffee mingles with the scent of Marlene's homemade apple pie while neighbors make decisions by actual majority vote, not the whims of a power-drunk dictator. The financial recovery was poetry in motion. Restitution payments from Delilah and her husband totaling over $200,000 with interest and penalties funded improvements that transformed our little corner of Michigan. We installed a playground where children's laughter rings across the water without fear of violation notices. The boat launch got professionally rebuilt instead of being held together with duct tape and bureaucratic neglect. But my proudest achievement is the Morris Memorial Trade Scholarship funding full tuition for 2 local kids annually to learn real skills like welding, automotive repair, and electrical work. Skills that build communities instead of tearing them down. Morris would have loved seeing young people learn trades that actually matter. My cabin became the neighborhood showcase for what's possible when you're not constantly fighting petty tyrants. Solar panels gleam in the morning sun, powering everything from my workshop to the security cameras that now capture deer drinking from the shoreline instead of HOA presidents committing crimes. Native wildflowers bloom where violation notices used to get posted, and the rain collection system Morris dreamed about finally waters the memorial garden we planted in his honor. The Conservation Initiative protects 50 feet of pristine wetland habitat in partnership with state environmental agencies. Real environmental protection, not the fake pollution complaints Delilah used as weapons. Property values increased 25% on average. Turns out freedom is valuable, literally. Our legal victory established precedent that's helped hundreds of homeowners nationwide. Sarah's guide for fighting fraudulent HOA claims has been downloaded over 100,000 times. We've consulted with 17 communities investigating similar fraud, uncovering millions in stolen fees and fake management contracts. Chelsea leads our neighborhood association with the competence and integrity that should be standard, but feels revolutionary after Delilah's reign of terror. Frank manages our finances transparently. Imagine that concept. Marlene organizes our annual Freedom from HOA celebration, complete with ceremonial shredding of old violation notices and the best barbecue in 3 counties. The ripple effects keep spreading. Congressional testimony featuring our case helped pass stronger homeowner protection laws in 12 states. University law schools use Pine Ridge as a case study in property rights and community organizing. Sometimes individual fights become part of bigger changes that help everyone. Delilah's aftermath reads like a cautionary tale about what happens when petty power meets real consequences. House in foreclosure, marriage strained by legal bills, banned from serving on any board anywhere. Her husband's fake management company dissolved amid lawsuits from other victims who found courage to fight back after our story went public. Every evening I sit on Morris's handcrafted dock, listening to the gentle lap of free water against legal shoreline. Grandchildren from Detroit splash in lake water that belongs to everyone again, not just whoever screams loudest at rigged meetings. The taste of evening air carries the sweetness of justice served and communities healed. The memorial plaque beside Morris's favorite fishing spot reads, "In memory of those who served their country and their community with honor." Sometimes the best way to honor the dead is by fighting for the living. Pine Ridge became proof that regular folks can defeat corruption when we stand together, document everything, and refuse to be intimidated by bullies with clipboards and fake authority. But this is just one victory in the war against petty tyrants. Wait until you hear about the HOA Karen who tried to fine me $50,000 for the wrong color mailbox and how I turned that harassment into the payday of a lifetime. Drop a comment with your worst HOA horror story. I read every single one because these battles are happening everywhere, and your story might inspire someone else to fight back. Where are you watching from? Let's build a community of people who won't be pushed around. If this story fired you up and gave you hope that the little guy can win, smash that subscribe button for Karen Stories, because I've got dozens more revenge tales where corrupt authority figures get exactly what they deserve. Hit that bell icon so you never miss legal tactics that actually work against bullies who think they can abuse regular hardworking Americans. Justice tastes sweetest when served with lake water freedom and community victory.